a second here. We'll get going, hopefully. All right. I hope that we start the year out better than we finish. Yeah. Uh, we were talking about it before. Um, a lot of Gentile people wouldn't make good Jews because in order to be a good Jew, you have to be serious about your religion. And I know that's, you know, um, I guess one of the things that it is, and we'll get with our lesson here in a second, but understanding the price that Jesus paid, that's a part of it, but there's more to it. Also, realize the vocation that you've been called into. This is serious stuff. I'm being a member of the body of the Christ is nothing to be taken lightly. And that is my big fear is people just take it lightly. And a lot of this just goes into the teaching. Hey, I got saved. Boom. And, with that comes a lot of the arguments. Once saved, always saved, and all of that stuff. And, there's churches who believe once saved, always saved. Churches who don't believe once saved, always saved. And I say, what if you change your definition of salvation? Then maybe it would be more serious. But if it's all about heaven, then heck, I got my ticket in my pocket. Who cares? And that's just kind of a Gentile American way to look at it. We're just spoiled people. I mean, really, we are. We can eat what we want, where we want, when we want. We got more stuff falling out of the closets and you can shake a stick at, and how many shoes and everything else we got. And all of this stuff, guys, there's nothing wrong with it, but we should know where this abundance of gifts comes from. Well, you say, well, I worked hard for it. Well, who gave you the body and the strength and the mind to even get up and go? And just to forget this stuff. And I wish, and like I said, I hope we start out stronger than what we finished this year. And that church really becomes the preeminence in our lives. Christ. That he may have the preeminence in all things, that you don't want to do anything without him. And gathering out together is important. You wouldn't have said it for us to gather out if it wasn't important. But I think this sappy grace matches, which I can see it, and on one hand it's so good, but at the same time, it can be taken so lightly. There was these guys that came to Jesus and said, hey, man, we want to follow you. We want to come to your church, but can I go home and bury my dad? I mean, what did Jesus tell him? Let the dead bury the dead. I mean, what kind of statement is that? I mean, this is the seriousness of this. And I know people that, well, guys, we're under grace, we're under law. Really, we should sum up the New Testament real easy. Let's just paraphrase the whole New Testament and say, hey, guys, it's grace, do whatever you want. Should we sin more that grace may abound? God forbid. I mean, Paul says, God forbid. Would warn them, don't you know, as many of you have been baptized into Christ, has been baptized into what? His death. It's serious business. And I think maybe we don't understand our vocation. Maybe we don't understand New Covenant. Maybe we don't understand these things. Like I said, it's always, generally it takes people catastrophe. And, most of us, not everybody. I mean, some people are raised up in church, but generally, for those that have been on the outside, it generally takes a catastrophe, something horrible in your life to get people to come into the church. And then, they come in and then, okay, we're gonna, and then they kind of fall by the wayside. These are the things I'm talking about because this, guys, is a long journey. And in order to go on this long journey, I mean, wouldn't Isaiah tell us, the youths, and he talks about them running and says they'll run out of strength eventually, but you'll mount up on eagle's wings. So what you need for the journey is sustenance. And that sustenance says, Jesus says, except you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part of me. That you don't have any life. And because it's a long, strenuous journey. If anybody says it's not, they're lying to you. It's a long, strenuous journey. And so when I see people falling by the wayside, we are instructed to strengthen feeble knees, not cast them out of the way. Strengthen feeble knees. And how is that strengthening feeble knees? Well, it's to present Christ before them, because we're changed into that same image by beholding his glory. Now, which kind of poses a little question, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. Maybe you can just ponder this as we go through this. When was Jesus glorified? But I call this New Year, New Covenant. I know we're at the end of this year. But you know what, guys? Jesus he's the end and the beginning. He's the Alpha and the Omega. And all points in between. He's it. I want to go to John's Gospel. Now let's just talk about this for a few minutes. John's Gospel, chapter 7. Verses you guys know very, very well. John 7 and verse 37. Maybe that's why nobody's here today. Maybe they're at the feast. You reckon? Now on the last day, maybe they're at the feast, Joe. Maybe that's where they're at. Maybe they're at the feast. Maybe now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out. Now I want you to picture this scene here. Now this is the Feast of Tabernacles, and on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, they would have a procession that would go down to the Pool of Siloam, and they would get water and they would bring it up. So you have all of them going on, and they would have one group go down to the Pool of Siloam. They would have another go down into the Kid Run Valley and get palm branches. And they would bring this up to the altar, and they would be putting the palm branches on the altar. And the high priest would be pouring the water out to commemorate the getting water from the rock, right? Their time in the wilderness, this great feast. Now, at this time, this is a very solemn occasion, right? Everybody's quiet. I know we're just thinking a bunch of crowds and all this stuff, but everybody's quiet. The palm branches are down, and the high priest is pouring the water out. I mean, get this scene in your head. If you could just think about 300,000 or 400,000 people gathered around. It's so quiet that all you can hear is the water pouring out, and Jesus steps up in the middle of all of that and he shouted. I mean, that's what this word is. He cried out with a very loud voice. Listen to what he said. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Now, can you imagine you're down and this whole scene, and here is this rabble-rouser from Nazareth standing up on the very last day of the feast, crying out. Everybody is hearing him. If anybody's thirsty, let him come unto me and drink. And then he goes on to say, the one who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. I'll just go ahead and read this and we'll go back and talk about it. But this he said in reference to the Spirit whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified. You know, we've sung that song, and it comes from a verse. You know, there is a fountain opened up in the house of David, a fountain, and you know, a fountain here, and we get these pictures, but a fountain is flowing. Have you ever seen the fountains? I mean, they're flowing, and there's water, and it's just flowing. And now Jesus jumps up and says, if anybody's thirsty, let him come unto me and drink. And then he says, out of your innermost beings, out of your heart will flow rivers of living water. So I want to talk about the healing stream of new covenant. If we can get a hold of this new covenant, I thought, well, maybe everybody is thinking, well, it's the end of the year. Next week they'll be thinking, hey, it's New Year, and there's a new covenant. I always think of the desperation of the woman with the issue of blood. And you know, my prayer often is that people will get desperate like she was. And you know what? Nobody was going to keep her away, was they? Nothing was going to keep her away. She had spent all that she had, everything that she had, and she says, I have got to get to Jesus. But here in John chapter 7, we find Jesus here in Jerusalem. Like I said, this is the Feast of Tabernacles. This Feast of Tabernacles commemorated the Israelites' time in the wilderness when they dwelt in booths. That's why they would have the palm branches. They built little booths. And when God gave them water from the rock. That's important. I mean, you guys know where this is. This is over in the desert, right? I mean, the one thing you need more than anything in the desert is what? Water. Rivers of life-giving water God gave them in the desert. I love how Paul put this. I don't know. Did you ever think about this? I mean, you probably see this and you watch Charlton Heston strike the rock and water comes out of the rock and they gather. Have you guys ever read the book of Numbers? Anybody in here read the book of Numbers? How many times did they move? They moved about 40 times in those 40 years. Do you think they had a group that went back to that rock and got water? Paul says the rock that followed them. Now imagine that. They're going around and they're hauling an ark and a rock that followed them. Now I just can't get it in my head. Did they carry the rock? Did the rock follow them? I mean, I can't get it in my mind, but just imagine a movable rock and water's coming out of it. Now you would think from some of these scenes and all of this stuff, you would think that they would be people full of faith, wouldn't you? But what's the scripture saying? They provoked God to anger, and these all died in the wilderness. Yet they drank from that spiritual rock, and they ate the manna every day. Now, what does this do for you? Once saved, always saved. Now, they were Israelite people. And see, it's like, okay, cut the Bible in half and throw the Old Testament away. God wasn't taking them to heaven. God was taking them to the promised land, wasn't he? And they fell short. And guys, you and I can fall short of the vocation that we've been called. We'll talk about it. But what we're seeing here in John's gospel is the specific focus on Jesus himself and what happens through him as the one single source of life. I am the life, he says. The one fountainhead of all mission. And I think that is so huge. Because I think, where there's no vision, the people perish. Now, when we say we need a vision, well, we need to see Jesus. But, one thing about it, we will go, we'll go to work. We'll go back to work. And the one thing that we will do when we go to work is we have a mission to accomplish, right? I mean, Neil goes to work. He goes down to VDOT. He's not just show up and, hey, we got nothing for you today. We're going to pay you. No, go out here, do this, clean this ditch, or cut these trees, get this road, whatever. I'm going to go on the railroad. We're going to have stuff we got to do. Well, we come to church, and what do? We kick back because we don't have nothing to do. The church doesn't know what to do. They have no mission. They have no goal. And, the Baptists, I guess has been the most splitting people that have ever been known, because how many different forms of Baptists are there? I mean, 35, 40 different sects of Baptists. And I can remember, not remember, but going back through the history, one of the splits the Baptists had was, do we do missions or not? So they become missionary Baptists. And some of them says, no, we don't need missions. And you kind of get this ideal in your head, well, you know what, I'm not called to go to Africa. Well, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not called to go to Africa, but I can tell you, you are called to go into your family. And you're called to carry the gospel wherever you go, and not just carry the gospel, but live it and be it wherever you go at all times. Now, this is a mission of the church. Because what does Jesus say? I mean, go back to that other verse, maybe verse 37. Now, on the last day, if anyone is thirsty. Now, I gotta ask you a little bit of English here. Is anyone? Is that? What kind of word is that? I don't even know what phrase I'm looking for. Does anyone mean anybody, or was Jesus just kidding? I mean, because there's a lot of people that, well, Jesus was just kidding. Only those special elite people can really come and drink. Jesus didn't really mean everyone. He just meant the few elites. Well, I'm telling you what, guys, I'm just stupid enough to believe that Jesus said, anybody that's thirsty, come and drink. Anybody that's thirsty. What's the prerequisite here? Thirst. Yeah. If you're thirsty, hey, come and drink. If you're thirsty, come and drink. Now, where did Jesus get this from? Jesus is quoting scriptures here. And he's quoting scriptures from Isaiah. Imagine that. Jesus must have loved the prophet Isaiah, because he sure quotes Isaiah a lot. You remember when he come in Luke chapter 4, he opens up the scriptures. And he just opened it right up and started reading Isaiah. Now here he is at the great feast, and he is quoting Isaiah again. So let's go read what Isaiah says. Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 1. Isaiah 55 and verse 1. Wow, look at this. I mean, this is the my NAS. I got a little bit different version that we got up there, but it says, "You there, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. You that have no money, come and buy and eat." Well, I mean, that's strange stuff here. But I mean, Jesus is quoting this and he's saying, "Hey guys, I'm the fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah. I'm here. Come to me and drink. You there." Anyway, and see, this is a call out. Isaiah the prophet, this is calling out. He didn't say, "Hey Judah, hey Ephraim." What does he say? Everyone, you there who are thirsty, come and drink. This is a broadcast appeal to anybody that's thirsty. Doesn't matter. I believe we'll read this in Revelation. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Anybody who's thirsty, come. An invitation here, isn't it? And this invitation here in Isaiah goes out beyond the walls of Jerusalem, beyond the walls of religion, beyond the borders of Israel. It's an appeal to anybody and everybody who is thirsty, come and drink. And look what he says in verse 3 here. Incline your ear. You know what that means? That means tune in, buddy. That means tune in, hush, be quiet, listen up. I've got something really important. Now, how do we start off? Okay, you're thirsty. Okay, so come and drink. And let me tell you what I'm going to do. Incline your ear and come to me. Didn't Jesus say that in Matthew 11? Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. Now here he is. Come to me, listen that you may live. Now I wish we could just read scriptures like they are. Now look, he did not say, incline your ear, come to me and listen that you'll go to heaven when you die. Did he say that? No. He says that you might live. When? You see, everything we do in the Bible is we say, put that over there. He says, right now. You are thirsty. I mean, what good would it do if I came to you in the middle of the desert, you ain't drank no water, in 3 days your lips is all split open because you had no water, and I said, buddy, hang on, 74 more years, you'll go to heaven and you'll swim in rivers of living water. I'd say hit the road, Jack. I need something now. I need it today. That's what he's saying. Listen that you may live. And what's he saying? I will make an everlasting covenant with you according to the faithful mercy shown to David. Anyone that comes, I'm going to make a covenant. I'm going to make with you the covenant that I made with David. Now, guys, we see all of that was fulfilled in Jesus. And now that offer is open to the world. It's open to the world. Open to the world. Now, we have to go back all the way here to Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, what does he say? Let us make two men. One of them's going to be the called and the chosen, and let's make another one who's not going to be the called and the chosen. And the one that's called and chosen is going to be image bearers, and the one that ain't, he's just going to let us make man in our image and our likeness. So this vocation to be image bearers was to all of God's human beings. Of course, we lost it. But, and I'm telling you that because this call to come and drink is not simply for some royal elite, but for the whole human race. For the same reason, the satisfying of thirst is for everybody who needs it. Come and drink. So with this invitation, this this echo, if anybody's thirsty, and then what does he say? Listen, incline your ear, come to me. We're invited to share in the blessing of covenant renewal, the sure mercies of David. How was it that verse that in one of the Psalms, His mercy endures forever? And I think every line it says it, His mercy endures forever. His mercy endures forever. His mercy endures forever. And you think, my gosh, you think this is somebody pretty thankful? His mercy endures forever. Now what does he say? Are you thirsty? Well, come to me, and you are invited into this new covenant. Same covenant I had with David. The sure mercies of David. Invited into this covenant. Now Jesus, remember, he stands up there and shouts it. If anybody's thirsty, come unto me. Now Jesus here, when he does this in John chapter 7, he's drawing together these themes of the first Exodus and the second Exodus. As we've done so in our Revolution of the Cross, this Second Temple period. They knew that they had the first Exodus, and they knew they needed a second Exodus. Do you know Jesus had an Exodus? I mean, I believe it's in Luke's gospel when Moses and Elijah appeared there and they spoke to him about his decease. It's the same word, Exodus, his Exodus. They knew they needed an Exodus. Now, you got to keep all this stuff in mind here of what's going on. Now, the Jews of Jesus' day, they knew their scriptures. They knew that their nation had been whittled down, and just like Deuteronomy had said, their sins had caught up with them. Their idols they worshipped had eventually caused Yahweh to remove his protecting presence from Jerusalem. And the Babylonian captivity which followed, that was only the beginning of the longer time of spiritual and political exile. Because remember, they're in the land, and what happened to the northern tribes? They're gone. Judah and Benjamin, some Levites, all that's left, and they go into Babylon, and you know, Nehemiah and Ezra, they get a decree they can come back, and what happens? Ain't but a few of them even wanted to come back. They liked it where they were. I mean, you're thinking, oh, they was getting beat, but no, they liked it. They liked the Babylonian food and the Babylonian garments and the Babylonian gods, and they they liked it. So the Jews had been whittled down, kind of what we've seen in Benjamin over there at the end of Judges, doesn't it? They had been whittled down. They are in spiritual and political exile. Even though a remnant came back to rebuild the temple, and that extended exile, exactly as it says in Daniel chapter 9, it had continued. And as the Jewish people, this tribe of Judah and Benjamin, the remnant, they had lived under the Persian rule, under the Greece rule, been in bondage to Syria, and now in bondage to Rome. So they were in so much bondage when Jesus says, you'll know the truth will make you free. They thought, we're free people. This is the thing that gets me. I see so many Christians that ought to be walking and living in the freedom, but they're not. Full of anxiety, full of worry, full of doubt, full of all of the stuff that we should be free from. But they're not. Yet all the time they look back and retold the ancient stories and reread Deuteronomy, and they knew that eventually after the curse of exile comes the promise. And you can read that in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 3. I don't know if you can get up there real quick. Maybe we'll just look at it. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 3. After the curse of exile comes the promise. Look, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity. See, look at this language. Now, what have we done with this kind of language? Biblical language. We've replaced all of that with go to heaven when you die. That ain't what he said. What he said was he will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you and will gather you again from all the peoples of the Lord. Your God has scattered you. Scattered. Now, does anybody have family that's scattered all over the place? It's very common nowadays. See, it wasn't then. It was like, that was a sign of a curse. But now it's like, well, hey, I got to go to Michigan to work. I've got to go to California to work. We've got to go to Texas to work. There's no jobs here. And see, we don't even relate. We don't relate any of that stuff. We just think, oh, well, no, that's none of that. We live in the New Testament. It's all grace now. Not even getting a hold of it. So, after the curse of exile comes the promise. And he goes on, and we won't read it, but God will renew the hearts of his people so that they will return to him with their heart and soul. That's what they wanted. Have you ever prayed the prayer? To me, it's, you ever feel yourself at a distance from the Lord? You ever pray, Lord, draw me back, Lord? Because I don't have, if you're really good and religious, you'll dig your heels in and you'll think, well, I'm just going to search after the Lord. You really need to get real and realize, Lord, if you don't draw me, I'm going to drift away here. Draw me. And even though in Deuteronomy chapter 32 it looks ahead and says, but you're going to have to go through some tough times here because God will continue to judge his wayward people and he will even raise up non-Israelite nations to make them jealous. Pull that up, baby. Chapter 32, verse 21. They have made me jealous with what is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols, so I will make them jealous with those who are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. What does that sound like? This is Paul writing in Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11. The Apostle Paul, they understood this because Paul quotes these verses right there in Romans. See, the Jewish people knew their scriptures. They had been wrestling with the question of the strange purposes of God, and it's all there in Deuteronomy. If only we had seen it. But for the early Christians, it was clear that in Jesus, the new Exodus had been accomplished. Now listen to what I just said. The new Exodus. I don't know if I could find that verse. It's in Luke. I'd have to look around here. Probably don't want to waste your time with it. Luke. Trying to remember where is the transfiguration in Luke's gospel? Anybody know off the top of their head? Maybe I found it. Transfiguration, Luke chapter 9. Okay, that's the verse. Luke chapter 9, verse 31. Yeah, look there. Who appeared in glory were speaking of his departure. What's a departure? Exodus. I'm out of here. Right? I mean, and in the Greek, I mean, they use the word Exodus. Moses and Elijah appear to Jesus. Isn't it something that Moses knows firsthand all about Exodus, right? He was the first one. And now they're talking to Jesus about the real Exodus. And I know again we're thinking, oh, Jesus is going to heaven. Who appearing in glory were speaking of his Exodus, which he was about to accomplish. Where at? At Jerusalem. Holy goodness. My goodness. He's going to accomplish. Now, here's a dumb question. Do you think Jesus did it? Do you think Jesus accomplished an Exodus? I mean, understanding the scriptures, because it's about an Exodus here. So, these early Christians, it was clear that in Jesus, the new Exodus had been accomplished. And Jesus, when did Jesus choose to do this? Passover. What was Passover? Passover was a celebration of what? Anybody know what Passover was celebrating? Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Huh? It was their exodus out of Egypt. Passover, the whole thing was their exodus. How are they coming out? Blood. Remember, go into the house, eat all of the lamb, have your staff in your hand, your shoes on, ready to go, because this night God is bringing you out. Exodus. And what did Jesus do at Passover? Man, they're talking to him about the Exodus. He's about the departure. And Jesus is about to accomplish this Exodus. I mean, Paul would get a hold of it. Should we sin more? The grace may abound. God forbid. Don't you know? As many as you were baptized into what? His Exodus. His death. Because what happens? God brought them out and he brings them to the Red Sea. And you remember what happened at the Red Sea? Most of Pharaoh's army made it across. And now Pharaoh's army, and we got to fight and battle with Pharaoh's army. Denise is shaking her head. Have you guys read the story? Because if you would go ask most Christians, what would most Christians say? Oh man, we're fighting Pharaoh's army. Well, not according to the Bible. According to the Bible, they washed up dead on the seashore, and they began to sing the song of Moses. Now, what is it that you and I sing? We sing a new song. Worthy is the Lamb. Why? For thou wast slain to receive power and glory and honor. You get it? These early Christians knew Jesus chose Passover to do what had to be done. And the early Christians knew that if you wanted to understand Jesus, you had to think Passover. You had to think Exodus. You had to think new Exodus, which is new covenant. And it was time at last for the thirsty to drink from the water of life. Now, this combination of Feast of Tabernacles and Isaiah 55 looks across to the other great prophets of covenant renewal, Jeremiah, I think Jeremiah 31 maybe, and Ezekiel. Jeremiah draws on Deuteronomy to promise from out of his own deep well of despair. You know, Jeremiah, boy, Jeremiah suffered. Jeremiah suffered. The weeping prophet, he suffered. He suffered personally the shame and horror that he was talking about for the people, and he realized that was part of the point. And you know, this is a thing that a lot of times we don't get today, and especially with the sappy gray stuff. You know, we're called to suffer with Christ. Well, I mean, honestly, we are. And you know what? We bear the shame. Jesus bore the shame. Why is it we think that we shouldn't bear any shame? That we might fill up the suffering. And you know what? In families, in our lives, maybe we don't get this and we think, we're church people. We ought to have it all together. Maybe there's a piece of shame for you to bear. Maybe there's some suffering for us to bear. Jeremiah understood that. That was part of the point. And guys, I could show you many, 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 many scriptures. I mean, you would have thought the greatest apostle of all, Paul, would have never suffered. And you just go on and look at the list of the things that he went through. That's why we need that sustenance so that we can bear those things and go through those things and strengthen those things when we have to bear this shame and this suffering. Jesus bore it right through the streets carrying that cross, hung naked, crucified. But Jeremiah was drawing from Deuteronomy, and he was saying there will come a time when God will put his laws in the hearts of people. He'll write it in their hearts and minds so they won't need to teach each other to know God, because they will all know him, even the little children. And again, that promise was sent out beyond the walls of Jerusalem. It was sent out beyond the borders of Israel. And he says it will need to be passed down through some certified teachers, because this gift will be for everyone. They'll all know me. But back in John chapter 7, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. The great prophet whom Jesus and John here, the gospel writer, are relying on here is Ezekiel. Ezekiel, man, he's got a lot of new covenant. Ezekiel promises with covenant renewal. Now remember Isaiah 55. Listen up, guys. If you're thirsty, come and drink. Come to me, and I'll include you into these covenant of David, right? I mean, that's how Isaiah and Jesus is coming to me. All you that are thirsty, come and drink. Ezekiel says that God will pour out clean water on his people to wash them from their uncleanness. Now, water in scriptures, guys, it switches. You used to think, well, if you think you got it. Water switches in scripture. It does. From water to drink, from water to wash in. It can also be the water of judgment. I mean, Red Sea, Jordan, it's judgment to one, it's liberty to the other. But the people passed through the waters on their new covenantal journey on their way to their inheritance. I think, those are, let me just throw this in there. I mean, people talk about inheritance, right? Now, think logically about this. This is something we don't do, because what do most Christians do? Inheritance means I'm going to my mansion in the sky. I get my mansion in the sky. Well, let's just talk logically. Let's say, for example, that I have a whole lot of stuff, and I die, and I give it to my kids. But I say in the will, you guys can't have it until you die. Now, what if they come to the will reading, and I said, Stevie, you're getting this, and Morgan, you're getting this, and Zacharuni, you're getting this, but you guys can't have it until you die. The lawyer would just say, man, your dad was crazy. Your dad was a weirdo. Guys, you and I have an inheritance now, and most of us don't even know it and don't even walk in it and don't use any of it, and we live like paupers. We have an inheritance, the sure mercies of David. We've got them. And the church, I look around and healing, we're talking healing covenant waters here. But we don't take it serious, and now it's just spoiled drink. You know, I love this, and guys, I believe this with all my heart. I know you do. When they came out and they walked through that desert, how many of them were sick? Anybody know? None. Not 9, none. Their feet didn't swell. The clothes didn't rot. There was not any feeble among them. Not any feeble among them. Is the water that we have to drink better than the water they had? I would say yeah, because we got the real water, Jesus. They had manna that fell on the ground, but Jesus says, I'm the real manna. Ezekiel 34, 35, 36, and 37, the great covenantal sequence. It assures the people of God's provision to meet the promises that had caused their exile in the first place. Because remember, exile, this exile goes all the way back to the garden. Adam is exiled from the garden. And if you go read Exodus 34, there's a promise of new shepherding for the flock. New shepherding. Because remember, woe to the shepherds. Woe to the shepherds. And what does Jesus say in John chapter 10? They get a hold of this. What does Jesus say? He's the shepherd. He's the door. A lot of people think that's Psalm 23 language, which it is, but it's Ezekiel 34 language. Jesus, the good shepherd. Ezekiel 35, rescue from enemies. Ezekiel 36, this long chapter, new blessings on the land, clean water to cleanse you, and a new heart, and God putting His own Spirit in us. Can you imagine that you're reading Ezekiel and say, wait a minute, our God, remember the pantheon of gods all around Israel, all kinds of gods. Gods that are still worshiped to this day, but people just covered up and say, we're not worshiping Mammon. We're not worshiping Aphrodite. We're not worshiping any of those. Yes, you are. All of those gods, but he was saying, and this God's saying, I will put my own Spirit in you. Who in the world could imagine that? Couldn't even conceive it. I'll put my own Spirit in you. And then plus in Ezekiel 36, he says there'll be new fruit farms. It'll be like the Garden of Eden. Wow. Anybody know what Ezekiel 37 is? Dry bones. You guys have heard that, dry bones, the great resurrection itself, the valley of dry bones that spring into life when all hope was gone, right? That's why it says they're very dry. All hope is gone, and they're just going to come together. Verse 9 of that chapter, I love it. Come from the four winds, breath, and breathe on those slain. Breathe on these slain so that they come to life. I love that. The Lord says, come from the four winds, breathe. Or come from the four winds' breath and breathe on these slain. What does slain means? They're dead. They're dead. What did Jesus say? I come that you might have life. And what do we say? Oh no, man, I got life, man. I don't need any life. Like you don't need anything to drink. You think you have life. You search the scriptures looking for eternal life, but they are they that testify of me. I'm come that you might have life. When did Jesus say that? When he's telling them he's the shepherd. He's the door. Come from the four winds. Breathe on these slain. Why? So that they might live. Why didn't he say so that they might go to heaven when they die? They're dead. What do the dead need? Life. When do they need it? Immediately. Come from the fore. I mean, this is not come. I mean, this is immediately. Come now. They're dead. They need life right now. Hurry, get here. Immediately. I wish people come to church this way. Wait, here, immediately, get here right now. Hurry. This is God Himself. I'm going to put my Spirit in you. And then breathe. So the Spirit here is doing the work of ultimate covenant renewal. All of these are ways of saying that the problems that had caused the exile in the first place, yes, the exile of Israel, but behind that, the exile of the human race from the garden. The problems are to be dealt with, and new covenant will be the means of new creation. When God does what He promises to do for Israel, this will be the means of blessing for the whole world. Remember, this goes all the way back in Genesis again, 12, right? Through Abraham's seed. Remember what they told Abraham? Remember, He said, through your seed, Abraham, I'm going to bless a few people. I'm just going to bless a few special people. Remember, He told Abraham that, didn't He? All nations. Jesus, anybody that's thirsty. Isaiah, anybody that's thirsty. Come and be part of this new covenant. That's how it all works. And once again, back in Ezekiel, chapters 38, chapters 39, Israel is assured of victory over the ancient enemies. And then at last, finally, the closing out of Ezekiel, we get a brand new temple. We get a new temple built. Now Ezekiel, he's also a priest. And Ezekiel is the one that sees the desecration of the temple by the priest and the people, and the desolation of the temple by being abandoned by God. Remember, he saw that. The desolation, guys, that's the abomination of desolation. Matthew, I think, 24, maybe it's in Luke, I can't remember, but everybody's worried, what's the abomination of desolation and all of that stuff? Ezekiel saw it, guys. It's when the presence of God left. Get a hold of that. But nothing else could even begin to be that. The abomination of desolation. I mean, Ezekiel saw the presence of God leaving. When the presence of God left, man, they fell. They went into exile. It was torn down, all of that stuff. But Ezekiel saw it. And now Ezekiel has seen them be destroyed by the Babylonians. And so it wasn't merely a national, political, cultural disaster. Because remember what the temple was. This is so important. The temple was the heaven and earth place. It was the place where heaven and earth met. Remember, Jesus in John chapter 3 says, you're from beneath. I'm from above. No man has been in heaven except he that came down from heaven. I mean, this language, I believe it's in John chapter 3. And it's like, wow. So the place where heaven and earth meet, this is so important, guys, because again, 99% of all Christian songs are about go to heaven when you die, and heaven is way over there, somewhere. It's way off. And guys, they were separated. But then God begins to bring the working model of restoration. And we starts off with Moses' tabernacle. Then we get to Solomon's temple. And it was the place where heaven and earth meet. Where God and man meet. Right? Heaven and earth meet in this tabernacle. And it was a sacred spot. And they were held together, heaven and earth. Now you got to hear this. Heaven and earth, what could hold them together? You ever think about this? What could hold heaven and earth together? Because in our minds, man, boom, heaven is over here, earth is here. But something, guys, now maybe you can go read a little bit of Paul in Colossians, and all things are upheld by the word of his power, or the power of his word. I don't forget how it goes. But what could hold heaven and earth together? Well, in type and shadow with the temple of Moses, or the tabernacle of Moses with the temple of Solomon, it was by the sheer grace of the Creator and covenant God, and by the sanctifying sacrificial lifeblood which prevented continuing sin and impurity and death from rupturing that link between heaven and earth. And when God's presence left, what happened, guys? I mean, do you realize the thing the church claims now is what really happened back then, because God's presence left? Now think about it. The presence of God left, and where was He? He was in heaven, and we were here. Oh my gosh. Now see, the Jews understood that. They knew it. We don't even have a clue. They knew it. And they had their prophets and Ezekiel and Daniel. And it's like, oh my gosh, how can we? So they had them a temple set up. But what were they waiting on? You see, when the temple was abandoned and destroyed, that small, vital working model of new creation had gone. Hope had gone. Heaven and earth were split. You see, people think that now. They think heaven and earth is split because they haven't seen Jesus. And because of that, for Ezekiel chapter 40, I mean, they're rebuilding the temple. For Ezekiel, the reconstruction of the temple after the exile was to be like new creation, the remaking of heaven and earth. That's how important this temple is. It was the new Eden, the new promised land, the new garden from which the 4 rivers would flow out to the surrounding countries. Because remember, this one river, the fountainhead, flowed out 4 directions to water the whole earth. The point of the temple, it would be the place where the living God would come to dwell. Remember, the whole point of the book of Revelation wasn't us going to live with God, was it? No, it was God coming to live with us. He tabernacled among us. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. So the point of the temple would be the place where the living God would come to dwell. And all through the Second Temple period, 164 BC, when the Maccabees cleansed the temple. That's what it was looking at when Herod is rebuilding the temple. Why is Herod rebuilding the temple? You guys have watched Mary and Joseph and Herod and all this. Why was he rebuilding the temple? Why was he making it, as Josephus would write, the most beautiful building in the world? Why? Anybody know why? Why? It was destroyed, but why was Herod trying to make it the most beautiful building in the whole world? Anybody know? Just some flaunt? No. They wanted the presence of the Lord with them. And they thought, if we can get the temple cleansed, if we can get it rebuilt, and it's so immaculate, so beautiful that God, do they still think that today, guys? John Hagee and those guys still think that. If we can get the temple built, then God will come back into His temple and live with us. Guys, that was the whole point. I'm just throwing this out there. Here's some free stuff for you. Guys, that was the whole point of Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and all of those things. When Jesus says you'll see the Son of Man coming in His glory, and when this temple is torn down, not one stone will be left. What he was telling, this wasn't God coming back in judgment, but what He was telling them was, guys, when your temple is torn down, that you've been waiting for the presence of God, then maybe you'll understand what is really going on here. You'll know that I am the true temple. Go read John's gospel. It's in there so much. The ideal of restoring the temple so that at last God will come back, and then we'll be all right because God is with us. Because with Him here, the whole world will be a different place. Justice and mercy will flow out like a mighty river to heal the world. Guys, the world needs healing. The world needs justice. The world needs mercy. Now, where's it going to come from? Magic dust out of the sky? Did we not read out of your bellies? My God, the church, wake up. There's a broken, hurting world that needs justice and judgment and mercy. And where's it going to come from? Oh, we're out of here. Hey, get me out of here. Spaceship, USS, go to heaven when you die. No, out of your bellies. So many times maybe we ask, why did God allow that to happen? I got a question. Why did you? When we begin to take this stuff serious. So when Ezekiel sees in chapter 43, God returning to Zion at last. And that ranks right there with Exodus 40, verse 1, and Isaiah chapter 40, the great scenes of the glorious presence returning to take up residence in new creation. Now this is the great moment of Sabbath. He comes to rest in this place. Homecoming. God and His people join in covenant together. If you'll go read, I believe it's 1 Kings chapter 8, you'll see when they brought in the ark. What is the ark? The very presence itself. God is going to meet you there between the cherubims, and they bring the ark in, and the ark finds its resting place right there in the most holy place. I love it when I go read Genesis, and I love the little verse, and the ark rested on Mount Ararat. The ark rested on the mount. Yeah, and you have come to that Mount Zion. And see, that's the great moment of Sabbath. He comes to rest in this place. Heaven and earth join forever in new creation. God and His people, heaven and earth, new temple. God will be there. Isn't that how Ezekiel ends? The name of this city is what? The Lord is there. And in Ezekiel chapter 47, we got a great river flowing right out of this temple. And as it flows, its waters get deeper and deeper and deeper, purifying waters in a great flood going down all the way to the Dead Sea, so that even the Dead Sea will come to life. And the Scripture says people will fish there. Listen, I know a little bit about fishing, and you can go to some places and there ain't no fish there. And why would you fish there? You can just tell, this place is, there's nothing, and there is nothing in the Dead Sea, nothing living in the Dead Sea. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. And he says, this water is so potent, it's going to flow all the way down, and people's going to go down there to the Dead Sea and fish. Zechariah, he speaks to this, and he talks about this, and he applies this to the returned exile, because you know who Zechariah is, because they've come back and they've rebuilt the temple, but they're puzzled and they're bored because God doesn't seem to have come back. Christian people should never be bored. That's why people don't go to church. They get bored. God is not here. God doesn't seem to have come back. But now, let me say this. Sacred space. You guys, we just went through Christmas. Sacred space carries memory, does it not? This is really real. You can go and people will hold on to things. And it could be your dad's watch, or a favorite chair that somebody sat in, or in a living room. That sacred space carries a memory. And it's sacred space. This is why people want to go to Jerusalem so much and walk through the streets. It's sacred space. To the Jews to this very day worship at the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, because it was sacred space, because at one time the presence of God was there. But guys, that is just the place of memory. Just the place of memory. So in the Second Temple period, they had rebuilt the temple, and it was the place of memory. But they knew that something was missing. Now the first temple, Solomon's temple, was torn down, and they rebuilt it, but a bunch of things weren't there. A lot of the furniture, things weren't exactly right, but most notably was the Shekinah. The tabernacling presence of God. It was missing, and they knew he hadn't returned. But the prophet said he would in Malachi. He says he'll come back, and it's going to be a shock. You're not going to get it. But let me go over here to Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 8. Zechariah 14 and 8. Let's read a couple of these verses. On that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them towards the eastern sea. See this? Now we're getting more directions, because Ezekiel said the water's going to flow down to the Dead Sea. But now Zechariah says, wait a minute, this water is going half of them towards the eastern sea and the other half towards the western sea, and it will be in summer as well as in winter. Why is that an odd statement? See, we live here around, guys, they're in the desert. So what happens in the desert in the summertime when it's 147 degrees? There's no water flowing. It's dried up, it's gone. You can't find any water. But he says this water will never dry up. It will, because most of the times you only get water over there in the winter. But this is going to flow, and it's going to flow not only to the Dead Sea, but it's going to flow to the Mediterranean Sea. Look at verse 9. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be the only one, and his name the only one. I love that. And all the land will change into a plain from Gibeah to Ramon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will rise and remain on its site from Benjamin's gate as the place of the first gate to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hanaliah to the king's wine presses. People will live in it, and there will no longer be a curse, for Jerusalem will live in security. I just love reading those things. People will live in it. And all of that. The immediate needs of the people. The water. And behind that, the overarching need for new covenant and therefore new creation. All of that from Ezekiel, Zechariah, Isaiah is coming through here in John chapter 7. But there's something strange here. Something strange. A puzzle. John chapter 7 verse 38. The one who believes in me, as the scripture saith, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. Now, guys, you won't find a reference to that anywhere in the Old Testament. So what in the world is John recording that Jesus says this reference? Now, the thing is, they should have been seen by those who read the whole Bible, because this is Ezekiel's picture that we were talking about. This is Zechariah's picture. It's the picture of a new restored temple, the sign of the new covenant, which was what the working model of the heaven and the earth creation. The place where once again God will meet with his people in grace and power despite their uncleanness and rebellion. And Jesus declares anyone that's thirsty, anyone that accepts this invitation, that such a person will be the living embodiment of the renewed temple. Let me say that again. Anyone that's thirsty, anyone that accepts the invitation, that such a person will be the living embodiment of the renewed temple. I mean, tear this temple down and raise it up again in 3 days. John chapter 2. This he spake of what? His body. I mean, what a promise here. And it flashes across the pages of John's gospel, summarizing so many prophecies and redirecting them through Jesus' own work to Jesus' own believing followers. And this is the very heart of John's vision of the mission of the church and our mission. This is the great image that itself is like a mighty river, intended to sweep us off our feet and wash us through and through to be new covenant people, to satisfy our thirst at every level. And Jesus not only quenches our thirst, but he adds from out of that person's inmost being, out of their heart will flow rivers of living water. And in answering their need, he redirects them as new covenant people so that they themselves become not just receivers of new covenant people, but also instruments or agents of that new covenant life. And I'm going to quit right here in just a second. And he adds this. The one who believes in me, as the scriptures saith. This will be my quitting point. We'll pick up on some of this more next week. But we are not to be like the Dead Sea. You know, the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth. And when I say not the Dead Sea, because you know what? All of the waters flow down into the Dead Sea. We're not to be like the Dead Sea, selfishly collecting all of the water from miles around and then becoming stagnant and undrinkable. We are to be living channels with the living water flowing into us as we worship and as we pray and as read Scripture, as we meditate on God's love. And then at the same time, that living water flowing through us out to a thirsty world. The Spirit and the bride say, come. I guess, guys, I will quit with that. But I hope you see this picture of what is going on here. And we're going to see how this was fulfilled and what our vocation is next week. We'll look at this some more. So we'll quit with that for now.